I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jen West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadowcasting. How's it going today, Jen?
Oh, it's going fabulous. I just got back from a ski trip that was amazing, tons of powder. I am riding high.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've been very busy the past couple of weeks myself, working on some exciting projects, some creative scaffolding adventures. And, the past couple of weeks has really brought something to light for me. And I just thought it would be an awesome topic for this week for our podcast. Let me paint the picture a little bit. Imagine you're in this big board meeting with a bunch of high level managers and CEOs just all sitting around talking about business stuff. And what happened is we were sitting in this meeting, and for 2 quarters, we've been planning this project, this whole revitalization of a marketing idea. And as we were talking about it, there was this sinking feeling that came into my gut. And I was like, what is going on? And I realized we had no clear definition of what we were trying to get out of this project. We knew what we wanted, but we hadn't really defined it. No one had taken ownership really of this project. And as we were sitting there realizing that we had spent all this time and money and effort putting ourselves into this project, it got to the point where if we didn't have any definition of what we were looking for this project, how are we going to know if it was a success? How are we going to know if it was a failure? And I realized this kind of translated to my own life a bit. How many times have I invested in myself? I'm going to start going to the gym. I'm going to start this New Year's resolution. I am going to X, Y, and Z. And we get motivated and exuberant and excited about these ideas, and there's no clear definition forward. And so what happens, I think, and what I want to talk about today is that we need to learn to define both for ourselves and with other people this idea of boundaries. And I know that that was a little bit of a wild turn to get there, but the concept to me is the same, putting on this consultant business hat / shadowcaster, right? Boundaries are all about definition, both for ourselves and for other people, about, as Brene Brown says, what's okay and what's not okay. And when we can't look inside ourselves, regardless of how excited or exuberant or passionate we are about what we want to do, if we can't define for ourselves what we want out of what we're trying to do or what we want out of someone else, it can create this miscommunication. It can create unheard expectations. It can create confusion and drama and a lot of emotion. For me, in particular, I would really love to dig in today for our audience and explore how boundaries both can be a defining factor for what we want out of our life and a way to defend and protect our own energy. I think oftentimes boundaries are seen as a limitation. It's this circle, it's this line in the sand or this circle we draw around ourselves, and you shall not pass this circle, this line. But really, for me, as I've practiced my shadow casting, is that boundaries are about definition. It's about creating and defining what we want in our life. Another way of looking at it is people talk about law of attraction, magnetism, creating what they want in their life. And they talk about doing things like gratitude journals and mantras or affirmations. And it's all the same thing, just through a different lens. You're creating a boundary, you're creating a definition of what you're looking for and what you will allow or not allow within your life. If you say, I am happy, joyous, and free, then you are setting a boundary for yourself that you're not going to allow things in your life that aren't happy, joyous, or free. And so it becomes really, really important when we begin exploring boundaries, what our intentions are, what our words are, and how we communicate both to ourselves and to others what those boundaries are.
I love this definition of boundaries because it takes it to a different level. And even before we started this podcast, I hadn't made it so consuming and powerful and driven. I love your story and how you took it in the direction to boundaries. It just made it way more playful and cool. I was like, where is he going? Maybe we're not talking about boundaries. Oh, there we are, boundaries. But it's great because the last time we talked about this briefly was in our self-care episode. And we brought up the fact that our boundaries are created from our values. And if we're moving from our values, then our boundaries are healthier and kinder. But if we're feeling like we're stuck and we're trapped and overwhelmed, then we decide on these external, you can't talk to me that way. And we try to change other people around us to create space, to give us a little bit of self-care. We create that force field wall. And the way that you just brought it to life, Dave, changes that energy, that it's us, that we're coming at the world a new way, that we are creating the boundary through our energy. And that's super cool.
I am just so glad that you enjoyed it that way. Something else came up for me as you were talking, and it's the idea of boundaries being a reaction almost versus like a response. Are we creating boundaries out of a reaction to things that are happening around us? If everything's pulling at us and demanding our attention and we're just like, enough, that might be a moment to breathe, but it's really digging in under the hood a bit and seeing why those things were pulling at us and how we can set clear expectations with those around us to communicate what our boundaries are. And to me personally, that's really hard. And again, I sort of snuck it in there when I was talking earlier, but Brene Brown really talks about this, and in a lot of different ways she brings up boundaries. But for me, let me back up. Shadow casting is always, for me, an internal art. It is the art of going inside and looking at how I look at the world and how I handle the world. It's my circle of control, which begins and ends with me. It's what I can think, say, and do. And one of the, I would say, up and coming thought leaders whose book I've just finished reading was The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And she has a lot of great anecdotes and stories and examples of how to use this theory in a boundary setting mindset. So for those who are unfamiliar, Mel Robbins talks about the let them theory, and that basically is a two-step process. The first part is let them. It, in other words, says you have to accept one reality, which is you can only control and affect what you think, say, and do. You can't control anyone else outside of you, not even really your kids, as much as maybe parents want to try. We can definitely influence or give suggestions, but ultimately their thoughts, choices, actions, and words are of their own volition. And sometimes we have to let people do things that we might not agree with. However, there's another half of the theory, which is the second part of let me. So after we've acknowledged and set maybe a boundary with somebody outside of ourselves, then we have to acknowledge our part in that story as well. And a great example is work. Again, putting on that business hat. If we are workaholics or we believe that our value is in the work that we provide, and so we engross ourselves in our work and we neglect our own health or our family or our other responsibilities, what can happen is we then set the expectation, or as the cliche saying goes, we tell people how we want to be treated. What happens is then we start to paint this idea of, oh, Dave will do this, Dave will do that because he's always done this, he's always done that. If we're hurting or we need help with this idea, he'll drop everything and come help us. And that can be with friends, again, with work, with family members. If you create this expectation in a weird way, that's kind of like I don't want to call it a negative boundary, but that is a boundary. Like you have set an expectation or a boundary that you will always be there for that person. And what happens is that as you continue to deliver on that expectation, you're sapping and stealing your own strength. And so what boundaries end up becoming is they get into reactionary, right? Because they have set this expectation that everyone else wants something from them. And so finally, that one last person asks that little last bit of energy from that person, and they explode or they whatever act out and they go, enough.
I am done with this.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, you stop doing that. You stop doing that. And so they start pointing the finger at everybody else and they go, I am setting boundaries. That's
Yeah.
not really setting boundaries, right?
Exactly. An interesting thing I was taught, I believe, when I was doing my Gestalt training, is my mentor would say, we teach people how to treat us. And that's kind of hard to take in sometimes. Like, I taught that person to be mean to me. Yeah, actually, by allowing it and letting it come, letting people sap your time, letting people use your emotions or your ability to hold space for them, you are teaching people how to be around you. Maybe you've taught people that they can come complain to you. So if they're having a bad day, you're the one they go to because you will listen and you're kind. And so you get every person in your environment to complain to you, to tell you their drama, to sap your energy as you hold space for them. Maybe you like that kind of stuff, but you've taught them that that's who they come to. So maybe you don't get a lot of their good news because you're the one that they go to for the bad news. You've taught them, if you're having a bad day, I am here for you. Come to me. And so
Yeah.
we have to look at that as we see all the people around us. What have I taught people I'm for? And then it's a matter of reinventing ourselves and creating new boundaries that people are not going to like. Nobody likes it when you change. So sometimes you want to take it slow. Don't do the explosion. Try to fix it before you're at explosion. You know, let's
Right.
take a breath and get to know what Brene Brown said. What's okay? What isn't okay? That's hard. We don't pay attention to it. We just realize that we're overwhelmed and blown out and exhausted.
Yeah. And I really want to emphasize that point. You're right. I kind of glazed over it and then you brought it back. And I want to even hit it home harder. Boundary setting, when you get to this point and you start to unpack both intentional and I would say unintentional boundaries that you've set, the number one thing I think you should focus on here is empathy for yourself, especially with the unintentional boundaries. Just like Jen and I have brought up, if you taught somebody to be aggressive with you or angry with you, or if you taught somebody that their time maybe was more valuable than yours because you constantly give it away to them, have some empathy for that. There probably are, again, shadow casting, shadows in there that are worth looking into, whether that's with a trusted mentor, therapist, counselor, because quite honestly, boundaries show up in a lot of ways. And we sort of hit on a few different ways people can unintentionally or maybe even set unhealthy boundaries. But I like to explicitly state them for our viewers just so they can look into their own lives and see maybe where these instances might have come up, because I think we're all susceptible to these. So the first one that comes to mind is people pleasing. And for this is always prioritizing others' needs over yours. In archetype typical speak, when we see the people pleasing, that can sometimes be seen with things like the prostitute archetype or the victim archetype. And especially these two are known as survival archetypes. And that's the emphasis I want to make here, and why I think empathy is so important is because a lot of times when we set these unhealthy or even unintentional boundaries, they were a survival mechanism that we learned in the past in order to get through a scenario to get to where we are today. And that isn't something we need to judge. That's just something we need to be aware of. So that way, when it happens in the future, we can acknowledge it and attempt to make a different choice. That's the power of boundaries. It's not about changing how the other person acts in anger. It's about changing how we choose to respond, not react, but respond to that situation.
Yeah. All boundaries are saying what's okay and what's not, but not expecting the other person to change their behavior. It's
Yeah.
all about what I will do instead. Giving a light example, let's say you're a person who likes to be on time to events, and you have a friend who is never on time, ever, ever, ever. And you've got a plan to go to some event, and it's really important for you to be on time. It's maybe you're making a first impression or something, and you've told your friend, yeah, you can come to this event with me, but we need to leave at this time. Now, normal boundary setting, just the way you feel about it, is about control. And so it's you're trying to control their behavior. So you say something like, be on time, don't make us late. You have to be here. And then you get mad and you make judgments if they're late. When you set a clear, healthy boundary, you say, yeah, I'd love for you to ride with me. It's better if we carpool, but I need to leave at this time. And if you're not here, you're going to have to find a ride yourself. And that's setting the boundary. It's saying, I would love to have you with me, but if I am leaving at this time, this is what I am doing. And it doesn't say it's fine if you show up late, you just have to drive yourself. Right? That's it. You have to take an Uber or whatever. We can ride home together. But I'm leaving at this time. Period. It's a boundary. It's what I'm doing, not what they're doing. And then they either make it or they don't.
That is a great counterexample to the people pleasing, right?
Mhm.
Because it's so easy when you're going to a party with a group of friends and you're carpooling and you offer to take someone with you. Of course, if they're like, well, I was thinking about staying till 11 and you were planning to stay till 10, it's so easy to start justifying in your head, oh, all right, I guess I could stay another hour. What's another hour? But again, that right there is where you're setting the different boundary, the expectation that, oh, if I tell Dave I want to stay an extra hour, he'll just let me. So it's really hard. I just, for me, I just want to make sure, because it's hard for me, at least speaking as like the co-host, like it's hard sometimes to set these boundaries because there are expectations. You know that some people might have other ideas or other opinions, especially in this people pleasing sense. It's it's about recognizing that you have a value to be as pleased as that person that you are trying to make happy. And that's I for me where my growth happened was recognizing that I had a right. I have as Dave to be happy in that situation too. And if that makes someone else unhappy, the boundary and the compromise then is just like Jen was saying, maybe you go get an Uber afterwards, maybe you get a ride with someone else, or maybe that person just agrees that they don't want to stay an hour late, but that is their choice. Again, it's not about changing their behavior, it's about owning and empowering your own.
Yeah. And a lot of this is knowing what you need. It does help if you've already set an expectation. Hey, I'm going to this party and I'm planning on leaving at 10. Then there's something there. If you go to the party and you haven't set anything, it's not always fair to be like, well, I plan to leave at 10. I'm not staying till 11. That's when compromise comes in. I'm getting tired now. Can we leave? I'll stay a little bit later if you leave a little bit earlier, or I'll catch an Uber, you take the car, something. That's when there's more compromise involved. But if you've already set the expectation, that's when you want to hold your boundary kindly, make it real.
Yes. Okay. So here's the really cool thing, too. This all ties back to the let them theory, which, again, highly recommend this book if you haven't read it. I feel like it is a digestible source of information that might tell you some things that intuitively you're like, oh, I kind of know that, or I kind of feel that. But it puts it into a framework, especially as a scaffolder, I love, but it puts it into a framework that I feel is really accessible, nuanced, but impactful. So here's why I'm so excited. In Jen's example, she literally said both words, more or less. She said, let them do what they need to do. Let them figure out their own ride. Let them be angry or upset if I want to leave at 10 p.m. for a party or whatever. And then the second half of the theory, me. Let me leave at 10. Let me stand in kindness and firm in my boundary. Let me do what I need to do to be empowered in my choice. And that's the crazy thing about this theory. Mel mentions it as critique, but what I find interesting is I don't think it was so much critique of her theory as much as the internal critique we give ourselves, which is if we say let them, there's almost this sense of like, she calls it superiority, like, oh, I'm just going to let them do their thing. Like just almost like condescending admonishment, but that's not really it, right? It is this, again, Renee is just a great example for this soft front, hard back. You stand firm in your truth, but you do it with kindness. And that's where I feel the empowerment comes in. And it's hard. It takes time. It takes practice. And the best way to do this, I feel, is to start practicing with yourself. What boundaries are you setting for yourself in your life? If you know that you need to be up at 6 a.m. every morning so that you can get in a 15-minute workout before you get ready for the day, then you're setting a boundary. I need to be in bed by midnight or 11 or 10 or whatever how much ever sleep you need. And so when you don't get to bed at the time you need, how do you handle that? How do you treat that? How do you let you handle that boundary? Because that'll give you some insight into how you let other people handle the boundaries you set. And so you can start building this muscle, this skill, and build it up over time. And as you're building it with yourself, really cool thing is that you're building kindness and compassion and empathy within. So that way, as you start to set boundaries with others, you understand that sometimes their reactions, sometimes maybe that anger that comes up or that upset that you're noticing in other people isn't so much voluntary as it's that involuntary response of recognizing that they have their own boundaries that they probably aren't enforcing, and you're probably butting up against some of those. And so it becomes this really playful, contextual relationship building tool where you can practice things like communication and empathy and learning to come from kindness rather than this hardness that boundaries are often associated with.
Yeah, and that compassion really shows up because as you start setting your boundaries, people will get angry and upset at you because you've changed. And it's having the compassion that goes with it. Like, yes, I've been this my entire life and I've let you do this and now I'm changing it and I'm asking for something different that's uncomfortable. And I get where you're coming from instead of like, I'm setting a boundary and you're being an asshole for not following it. It's different. You're asking to build a different relationship. And that's hard. People like consistency, you know, and when that changes, I mean, that happens when if you start a workout program or you change your health, that is uncomfortable for other people. And so creating that space, allowing them not to like it, still caring about them and being like, I get you don't like it. It's different. It's weird. Some days I don't like it. It's hard to maintain my new boundary. It's hard. And I'd like to just bring up, Dave mentioned the archetypes of the victim and the prostitute. We did an entire podcast of that last year. But just as a reminder, the victim in archetypes is neither good nor bad. It's just a guardian. And this particular guardian, the guardian of self-esteem. When you are working with your victim archetype, you are checking in to see if you are letting your boundaries be overrun or if you're standing in your self-esteem and being okay with people not being happy with you and owning that you have the ability to be happy, to have somebody help you, to not be responsible for everything. The victim's a good archetype. And I highly recommend going back to and listening to our survival archetypes because that's where they live. And Dave also said the prostitute, which is a very uncomfortable word. but the prostitute is the guardian of faith. And it's faith in yourself, faith in the outcomes you can create as you do what Dave talked about at the very beginning of this podcast. If I want to have joy and happiness and lightness in my life, I'm not going to let in all of that negativity. I'm not going to be the person who gets all the drama from everybody. I'm going to create space. And I have faith in me to still be a good person as I create that space.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had assumed our audience had listened to our previous podcast. So for those that haven't, I think that's a great intro to it. Hopefully we can tag it in our podcast so that they can go back and listen to that.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I'd also like to emphasize with the last survival archetype you brought up, prostitute, that this goes to the second unhealthy boundary that we can set, which is overgiving. And it's giving more than you should or that you can afford emotionally, physically, mentally, whatever that is. And it's neglecting your own needs in the process. And this fits with that archetype really well because the idea is that the prostitute is the guardian of faith, faith in ourselves. If we don't have faith in ourselves, then we often give our faith out externally to other people, to other things. It can be a boss, it could be a partner, it could be a parent, it could be money, it could be an addiction, drugs, alcohol. It's really the essence of this archetype is going, you aren't giving enough faith in yourself and you're going outside for other people and looking for it. And the problem is it creates this almost Pavlovian response where we reach outside ourselves to find faith in someone else. We get that rush of excitement, serotonin, adrenaline when someone congratulates us or thanks us for our efforts, and we go back out and chase it again. And it becomes this relentless hunt for acceptance from other people, going kind of back to that first unhealthy boundary. But this is specifically stemmed in the idea that we have to give and give and give and give in order to receive approval and affection and faith within ourselves that we don't get outside of ourselves. And that's kind of the paradox.
Yeah, you have to start with the faith in you. And
Right.
Boundaries are a beautiful thing. Especially if you are learning what's okay and what's not, and you come in contact with a new person, because then it's built from the very beginning and you don't have the pushback of people who have known you for a long time. It might, as you're starting to build healthier boundaries, to practice with people you're just getting to know, or with work colleagues, or somebody if you go to a gathering that you haven't met them. You just put that persona on with the new vibe person, and it helps you build it in a healthy way, because there is going to be conflict with people who've known you all your life if you start setting boundaries. But with new people, it's just how they know you from the beginning. Oh, they leave parties early, they go to bed. That's what they do. We plan for that. And it's not an evil thing. So sometimes you have to start slowly building it. And you can tell people, hey, I like to go home early. People who love and know you, I like to go home early, and I'm going to start doing that. But I think the number one thing with these boundaries and why we need them and what they give us is that we know ourselves better, and we honor that, and we honor other people by telling them. We can be kinder and gentler because we've told people who we are. We're not trying to fit in and to get people to like us and just deplete ourselves. We're like, this is me, and I love you, and you be you, and I'll be me. And if you like me, come join me.
Yeah.
It's just easier. It's just lighter. It just works so much better when we're real and we know who we are and we know what we need, and we're able to communicate that out in a strong, healthy way.
Hear, hear. That was beautiful. So we've talked about what boundaries are, where they can come up, the let them versus let me. We've sort of dived into some unhealthy boundaries and what those can look like. And you've just given a very beautiful summary of what boundaries can give us as we set them. So I would love for the audience, though, for us to spend these last few minutes diving into what do healthy boundaries look like? Like, what are some examples? What are some real world actionable things we could give the audience today that if they're listening could maybe take next week with them or whenever they're listening into their lives, whether they use the boundary internally or externally? One of the first ones that I wanted to hit on, an emphasis on the I, is using I statements. And it's focusing on my feelings, my needs, and not blaming others. This one is really hard, but I also wanted to pick it because I was laughing as I was putting this together and thinking about these notes, and I saw that one. How many times and how many sitcoms and TV shows and movies do they make fun of that? Where they go, where someone like overly is emphasizing their words, going, I feel I need blank, or I felt this, or I acknowledge what you're saying. And it's this almost like cheesy, cringy. But here's the thing, I think they make fun of it a little bit because it does work, but it's so hard for us to step into that because we are sensitive to other people around us. We are social creatures and we want to have positive and joyous interactions with others. And often when we speak from first person and use I statements, it creates separation to the point where even in like business school and stuff they teach you, it's we, it's the team, there's this group think. And part of boundaries, unfortunately, is creating some individualism for yourself. It's learning what does Dave want? What does Jen want? What do I want?
It's an ownership thing.
Yes. And hand in hand with that, see, I got excited and threw off my hat. Hand in hand with that, ownership equals empowerment. The more we own the more we dive into the let me part of Mel Robbins' theory, the more we own how we think, feel, and act, the more empowered we feel in our lives. And that's a hard concept, I feel, for me, or it was for me to really hold on to because it felt a little paradoxical. How can I feel empowered using I statements and yet creating almost this distance with the person I'm communicating with? However, what happens is, and I think Jen would agree with this, is it creates an invitation because a lot of people, again, this is one of the benefits of boundary setting is you're creating empathy and understanding and maybe even giving generous assumptions to how other people are handling things. It opens them up to speak from that space too. Remember, we talked about at the very beginning how unintentional boundaries are the ways that we are training others to treat us. That is both a con and a pro. The gift of that doesn't disappear. It's just if you're intentional with it or not. I really want to emphasize that. When you come from I statements, you are retraining both yourself, how you want to be treated, and those around you, how they will treat you. And I think that's really empowering if you own it.
Yeah. And another way of creating healthy boundaries is the way we communicate. We need to be clear and concise. It can't be an iffy, well, I kind of like to go home at 10, if it works for everybody. That's not a boundary. That's wishing and hoping people will wishing and hoping and singing. Okay, sorry. It's making the other person have to listen for the subtle context that you're trying to put out, not clearly saying, I need sleep tonight and I need to go home early. It's putting it in the other person's court saying, if you will just give to me because I don't have the power to make this decision. And if you don't, I'm going to feel resentful, but I'm not really setting anything real. Communication's huge. You have to be clear. You have to state your needs. You have to allow for the fact that they may not like your choice. And that's just how boundaries work. There must be clarity. There must be a line. You must have that hard back that Brene Brown talks about. And the soft front is just loving them regardless.
regardless of the outcome.
Yeah.
I I would agree with that. And I feel like we've been recording for over a year now. And one of the things that has come up for me as I am realizing right now, real time, as we are podcasting this, is most of our podcasts end with a focus on our tagline, because I feel that our tagline is important, celebrating our humanity. And this one has sort of a middling feeling, almost like we are celebrating our humanity by recognizing our boundaries and learning to communicate that with other people. Unfortunately, this is one of those uncomfortable ones of celebrating our humanity. Sometimes when we practice shadow casting and we really look how we show up in the world and how others are showing up to us, it can be uncomfortable. Lean into it. That is where your gift is, with the boundaries. And a lot of times we fight it, we run from it, we hide it, we go to our safe spaces, we go to our substances, or we go to social media. We try to tune it out in whatever we've trained ourselves to do. And boundaries are hard, which is why, again, I emphasized in the middle, and I want to emphasize again here at the end of the podcast. This is work that you should, probably one of the only shoulds I'd ever say, but I would highly recommend doing this work with someone. If it doesn't feel safe, if this is uncomfortable for you, even at the end of the podcast, this is something to address further with someone that's trusted, a trusted friend, a mentor, or a therapist.
Yeah. When we're thinking about boundaries, right now, our entire conversation has been on boundaries we set outward. But also, this can really help us get used to when other people set boundaries with us, because it makes us feel uncomfortable. And there are times when the boundaries that come at us make us feel like the person doesn't like us, or they're mad at us, and we take it very personally. And by honoring our own boundaries, we start to honor other people's boundaries. And we start to see the difference between people who are setting healthy boundaries and people who are kind of toxic. And they're trying to change you, instead of saying, this is what I require and this is what I'm going to do. You can do whatever you want. Now, some people feel dejected hearing that. And what you learn to own is like, they are owning their world. They are sovereign onto themselves. And I like that person because I know where I stand with that person. They are consistent in who they are. They're not going to be resentful or mad at me because they didn't set a good boundary and tell me what they needed. I want to set my boundary and tell people what I need. And that's where the celebrating our humanity comes into, because we start to see the difference. We start to see where people are trying to control us by making us act a certain way, and people who are trying to control themselves and let you be however you are. And it's powerful and it's good. And it actually raises the maturity of all of us, the more that we can be kind, compassionate, and set healthy boundaries.
Yeah. And true to form, the more you set these healthy boundaries and the more you lean into it, you will find those people like Jen was talking about that are in their own personal sovereignty and setting their own boundaries, that have clear expectations with you of what they like, don't like, and what they expect and aren't expecting. And then you start to magnetize those people around you, and it elevates everyone else, because as you're setting expectations with those around you, that trickles around. Then they start to set expectations. They go, oh, I can because Dave did or because Jen did, so I'm going to do it with this person. And then that person realizes, and it kind of expands out that way. And that's how we're celebrating our humanity, by increasing our maturity. I just, chef's kiss.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting because you probably don't see them as boundaries, because when you met these people, they're like, yeah, I go home at 10. And that's all they say. They're like, I'm going home at 10. If you need a ride, that's when I'm leaving. And you don't see it as a boundary. Mm-mm. Because it's just the way they choose to be. And it's so clear and so nice. I'm leaving at 10 if you want to ride,
Sorry, I just want to throw out too. As Jen was saying that, there was a clear visceral reaction in both Jen and I noticed it. I don't know if she noticed it, but as she said that, both our shoulders relaxed. And that's the difference. It is almost reassuring. She said it with kindness. That's the key, right? It's the hard front, soft front, hard back. That's the key. She didn't say, we're leaving at 10. You're either ass in seat or not, That's not what she said. Oh, there's my first swear word on the podcast, I think. She didn't say that. She just said, hey, I'm leaving at 10. And it was just kindness. It's just, this is what I'm doing for me. If that works for you, great. If not, you'll figure something else out. And it's just, I'm leaving at 10. It's kind of the equivalent of no is a full sentence, right?
Yeah, so play with that. Start paying attention to people and what they say. Are they clear? Are they concise? Who do you feel the safest with? Just start paying attention to how they communicate, because I find I feel the safest with people who just tell me their truth. And I love being around those people. The people who are iffy and I always feel like there's something just a little off, or they might be resentful, or I have to walk on eggshells to be careful on how I communicate. They're not holding their own boundaries. They don't know what they want and what's important to them. And so, so play with this in the what makes me feel lighter around people, and then start taking that in, because that's what boundaries really are. They make people feel lighter around you. You're more inviting because you're clear.
And recognize too that communicating boundaries is different on text versus in person too. There's different body language cues. There's different tonal cues. So a recommendation that I have towards the end of this too is if you are newer to setting boundaries and you're practicing and learning it, as hard as it is, do it in person if you can. Because if you communicate it over text, it can be easily misconstrued. People can put words in there that aren't there. People can put tone in there that isn't there. It's a lot easier to practice this in person, which is why, again, we recommend practicing with yourself first. You will learn your own reactions to what you're saying, and therefore you'll kind of pick up on how other people will react to.
100%. Yes. In person, be real. Let's learn to communicate again. Not everything has to be text.
Right. And, let us know in the comments. How are you practicing your boundaries? Are there other ways that you practice boundaries that we didn't bring up? Are there unhealthy boundaries that you're noticing that we didn't mention? Let us know. And as always, make sure to drop us a like, subscribe wherever you're listening. Again, give us those comments, share us out with your friends and family. We always love hearing from everyone on our podcast. And until next time.
See ya.